can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost in the moment. All I want is for you to come back. Now I'm caught in the middle of life, and I need you to survive.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the most powerful platform for truth, bar none, on God's green earth. This is your platform for education, elevation, and edification. This is the Red Pill Diaries, and I am your host, your brother, and your friend, Rashid. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your schedule, your day, your night, wherever it may be, to take the time out to listen to this platform, to listen to the truth, to listen to me, to give a little bit of this unrenewable resource that we have called time, just to hear the truth. Thank you so much. We'll be joined shortly by Professor Kevin Barrett on the platform. We're trying to make sure that he's in the right booth because they switched the links, and I sent them another link up, and he said he got that link. So I'm trying to wait and see if he's gotten that link, because give it a few minutes, and then if not, I'll send him another link. This is what I do. This is what I go through. I mean, you would think that I had 700,000 subscribers, right? But this is what I go through on a daily and show by show basis. And I'm checking my emails to make sure that he hasn't emailed me, and I'm checking my texts also. So now, this show, Live with Kevin Barrett, we're going to talk about different issues, especially about what's going on in Palestine, what's going on with the implosion of the American empire, what's going on with West Asia, because all of this, remember, I told you, all of this has a connecting point. The American empire is becoming so desperate, and what's so crazy about this is that the language and the lingo that I've been using for years, now you see geopolitical analysts, military analysts, you see financial analysts, you even see world leaders using the lingo that I was using and have been using for years. Why is that? Did I come over to their thinking, or are they now being forced to reevaluate their thinking and come over to the way that I've been presenting things? This is very important for you to understand. Now, there was something that came up, and as we wait for Kevin to join us, there was something that came up. I was watching something on, I had clicked to RT, okay? And I scrolled, well, we know about the bombing in the Middle East, and I'm going to go back to that in a second. I'm trying to save that for Kevin. But down here, when you scroll down, this is what is said about the situation. And tell me if this is not what I have been telling you guys. I've done show after show. They're even taking my titles of shows from years ago, like the boiling frog in the pot, and all of this stuff I've done years ago. All right. And it's becoming mainstream lingo, but I've done it. As a matter of fact, I did the show, and YouTube erased the show twice. And this was done years ago, right? The boiling frog in the pot. And I was talking about how the empire was tantamount to a frog in water, in a pot. And as the water heats up, see, because the empire didn't know that it was in a trap, but as the water heats up, the pain becomes more real to the empire. And we're looking at it in real time. Hopefully Kevin is not in the wrong booth, but hold on one second. Let me see. Let me hit him up real quick, tell him we are live. Hold on one second, everybody. I have a lot of emails to answer. Celine, hold on one second, Celine. Kevin, scrolling down. All right, all right. Oh. Everybody, hold on 1 second. Give me 1 second. I'm one person. That's my guy, Dimitri. Uh, so we haven't heard from Kevin. He'll be in the booth in just a second. If he's not in the booth in the next 3 or 4 minutes, I will contact him and get him in the booth, okay? The right booth. As I said to you who are just joining us, they've been playing with the links. So I had to send Kevin fresh links last night to make sure that he got it because they were the wrong links. It's crazy. But now, let's go back to something that I was telling you about, okay? Let me pull this up real quick. Here's an article on RT, okay? And the article titled, Trump made a deal out of desperation. This is from the Iranian Supreme Leader. What have I been telling you guys since the platform started? And even before I did the platform on YouTube 4 or 5 years ago, I did a show, for a radio show for 12 or 13 years. And I've been telling you this, that the empire is running out of time. And when you run out of time, desperation sets in. When things that used to work for you no longer work for you. When all of the levers of power that you used to enjoy no longer can work like they once worked for you. And pull your feet out of the fire. Desperation sets in. It's with anybody. Just let me give you an example. It's with anybody. When you have bills to pay, and you've exhausted all your resources, and these bills are maybe your car note, or maybe your light bill, or maybe your mortgage or rent, or something like that. And you've exhausted every avenue mentally that you think you've exhausted, because there's always an avenue. But you think that you've exhausted every avenue. Desperation sets in. So you have $5 in your pocket. I'm going to go play the lottery. Hopefully I can win my rent money. Or if you have a mortgage is due and you don't have the money, but you have about $300 of that money, what do? I'm going to go to the casino. Maybe I can hit my rent money. Maybe I can hit my mortgage. Maybe. That's throwing crap up against the wall to see if anything will stick. This is what I'm telling you. So even the leaders of the world are starting to recognize the desperation that is being shown by the American empire. So let's read a little bit of this, okay? Because I haven't read any of this, and this will give us a little time before Kevin Barrett. And remember, he's in Morocco, okay? So it may be a little time thing. It says, Trump made a deal out of desperation, according to the Iranian Supreme Leader. Tehran will not submit to any excessive demands by Washington during future talks, Ayatollah Mujtaba Khomeini has said. The U.S. President Donald Trump pushed for a memorandum of understanding with Iran because he found himself in a dire situation, the Islamic Republic's Supreme Leader has said. Now, let us get to something real quick, okay? Because this is very important. You know, we like to give facts. Okay, according to the word of the definition, according to the AI overview of the word dire, that's D-I-R-E, it means it's an adjective used to describe something extremely serious, dreadful, or indicating a terrible outcome. So the supreme leader of Iran knew, and now he recognizes and is openly stating that the memorandum of understanding that was signed between the U.S. and Iran was a desperate act by a desperate power that is desperately trying to cling on to some semblance of hegemony as it implodes. You understand? We have to connect the dots. All while this is going on, remember, China is pushing the yuan. China is pushing the Belt and Road Initiative, the Silk Road. China is even trying to connect with the North-South corridor. China is trying to connect the ports in Gulf in Pakistan to the Iranian ports. China has started a rail line from China through Kazakhstan, through others, up and through Iran. China has a rail line from China to Europe. China is building infrastructure across Africa. China has invested in an alternative route to the Panama Canal in South America. Desperation breeds desperate policy actions. So if we don't have this look, this straight look here, we can be deceived, and we can wonder, we can say, well, maybe America is doing this because of this. No, we have the facts. We have the facts. All one has to do is look at the facts. I'm going to play a clip, and while I play this clip, I'm going to contact Kevin, okay? While I play this clip. This will give me time to contact him, hit him up real quick, and I'll be right back. This goes along with what I'm saying to you. I'm glad this clip is on the board. I was going to play this on yesterday's show, but I'm going to play it for you today. And after that, we're going to unpack it, and hopefully Kevin will be in the studio, and then we can do our thing. If not, we're still going to shake, rattle, rock, and roll, okay? Because this is how we do things. And I want to thank you all for noticing the slimming up, all of that of me, and the toning up. I told you guys I was getting back in fighting shape. I'm over half a century old, and I'm still out there giving these jujitsu and judo and martial art as hell in training. But I want you to check this out. All right.
Countries can defeat larger countries through asymmetrical warfare, and that's what Iran did.
So in your article, you write that empires in decline blunder into conflicts with little understanding of where they are headed, and they alienate their allies, which is exactly what Trump has done. So what stage of imperial decay do you think the United States has entered, and is there any plausible path to a managed decline rather than a chaotic collapse?
Yeah, well, that's a good point, because the British Empire was managed decline. But I don't think you're going to get managed decline under Hegseth and Rubio and Trump. What you're going to get is implosion. Well, I think we're already at a state of implosion because these people have no strategy. I mean, the difference between the United States and Iran is that Iran had a strategy, asymmetrical warfare, the kind of creating grids where military commanders had autonomy in case Central Command broke down, the fact that they had buried their ballistic missiles deep underground. That's why when you saw images of them being launched, they kicked up these huge dust storms. And the New York Times reported the other day that 70% of their missiles are still intact. So Iran had a strategy, and they didn't go after the American ships, which stayed about 800 miles away because they didn't want to get sunk with, Iranian missiles. They waged highly successful asymmetrical warfare, and I covered the insurgencies in Central America for 5 years. That's how, weaker countries can defeat larger countries through asymmetrical warfare. And that's what Iran did. But we had no strategy. It was a non-reality based belief system, as I mentioned before, based on, the fictions that Netanyahu sold to a very gullible Trump, not unlike the, non-reality based belief system that led us into the war in Iraq. And again, you saw this small cabal of Cheney and Lewis, Scooter Libby, and Wolfowitz and Pearl ignore all of the assessments made by both the Pentagon and the CIA to push us into 20 years of a fiasco in Iraq and jumpstart, turbocharge and a very virulent insurgency by essentially creating chaos by dismantling the administrative state and disbanding the military and everything else. So it's that's what happens with empire at the end. It seeks to regain a lost hegemony, a lost global dominance through military adventurism, but that only accelerates the decline. And that's true at the end of every empire. I mean, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which stumbled like the Germans into World War I, the Athenian Empire that attacked Sicily and all its fleet was sunk and everything else. So that's what empires do. They become their own worst nemesis, and that's of course precisely where we are.
And so, how so you say this has empowered the global South and China. What do you when people use the term global South? What do you mean by that?
I mean the traditional West. I mean, I think Israel is sort of, although it's not in the Northern Hemisphere, it's part of that. But it's these traditional alliances among heavily industrialized nations that are predominantly in the global North. But I think the genocide has been very important. We haven't spoken about it. This live streamed genocide has sent a very stark message to the global South. And remember, the global South has suffered genocides and holocausts of its own. It's not so much recognized by Western perpetrators, but Namibia with the Herero and the Namakwa, these were under the Germans, the Indians and British. I mean, the 1943 Bengal famine, I think it was 3 million Indians died because the British were taking all the grain to support the war effort. Churchill's response was to call them a beastly people with a beastly religion. I mean, so there's always within the British domination of Kenya and the genocide that was committed against the Kikuyu, Imperial Reckoning, a very fine by a Harvard historian, very great book on that. So there's already an acute awareness of this propensity to carry out genocide within Western culture. But the genocide in Gaza was a stark message as the climate breaks down, and that is that we'll stop at nothing, even genocide. And there's a very good book by a great Indian writer, Pankaj Mishra, called The World After Gaza that I highly recommend. So, or you can go on YouTube, and I gave a lecture on this at Princeton University on the same subject. So within the global South, that whatever veneer or mask of the concern for human rights and democracy, and that's completely been obliterated, because it's not just that we blocked resolutions at the UN to censure Israel, but the Western states, the UK, Germany, the United States pumped tens of billions of dollars in there to sustain the genocide. Israel ran out of its stockpiles a few months into the genocide. And that, of course, was, this gets to another reason we're in such trouble is the cluelessness of the Democratic Party. They just issued this, apparent critique of the Kamala Harris campaign. I mean, what'd she spend? $1.5 billion. This vapid, issueless, celebrity-driven campaign. And they didn't even mention Gaza. 77% of registered Democrats want to cut military aid to Israel. But they're part of the problem. They are locked into their own kind of fantasy world driven by corporate money and corporate power. And that, I think, is one of what I find so frightening is there's no credible opposition.
Everybody come see me on tour. I'll be in Spokane, Tacoma, Los Angeles, special.
Once again, Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you doing, Rashid?
I'm doing pretty good. For everybody who doesn't already know, this is Professor Kevin Barrett. He writes for Veterans Today and multiple platforms, and he's a speaker, an author, everything. So, Kevin, before we elaborate on what's going on in Lebanon and the U.S. partial capitulation to Iran, would you tell the people a little bit about yourself and how you are also the co-founder of Scholars for 911 Truth also.
Okay, yeah, sure, Rashid. And I apologize for being a little late here. I got some very sad news that my False Flag Weekly News co-host, Kat McGuire, has passed away. She was a really good activist who went from being a kind of a left-wing feminist to a red-pilled truth seeker, and a very brave, very, very honest, and very sharp woman. And she's been sick with cancer for a year, and we just lost her today. So I'm kind of mourning her, and I was running a little groggy there. But anyway, so I'm among other things, I do host False Flag Weekly News, and I publish my own books and write articles at uns.com, at American Free Press, and at Crescent International, the great Muslim monthly. And I've been doing that because I got basically chased out of the University of Wisconsin and American academia for being one of that first generation of 9/11 truth professors. And I was the one that Fox News picked to witch hunt to try to scare off all the others back in 2006. So that's why I've been doing this alternative media stuff ever since then, which has freed me up to really pursue and tell the truth in a more forthright and sometimes ruthless way than people do when they're still employed by the university. So that's the short introduction there. The Scholars for 9/11 Truth thing. Yeah, that was actually in 2006. By June 2006, we already had over 100 professors signed on to Scholars for 9/11 Truth. And that's why the cover-up team at that point decided they had to start pushing back instead of ignoring the 9/11 truth movement. And I got nominated as the whipping boy to try to scare away all the other professors. So they dragged me on Fox News, and Hannity went after me, and Bill O'Reilly demanded his chance to go after me. And I promised my university administration I wouldn't do any more Fox News because they just lost $500,000 overnight and canceled contributions when I went on. So anyway, big scandal there in 2006. And since then, I've been doing this independent media thing, just like you do.
So, Professor, a lot of people, they are disappointed in Trump, but you've been on my platform multiple times, and you have tried to tell people how Trump got his start and how he was a plant in the system because of his affiliation and how he had got his dirty money and who influenced him. And could you just regurgitate a little bit of that, and then we'll bring it up to speed about what is actually going on, and does Trump call the shots?
Right. Well, I mean, the sort of the understated way to put it is that, Trump has spent his whole career hanging around with Jewish dominated organized crime. I mean, everybody would admit that, he's in that world, right? Casinos, hotels, New York. I mean, come on, right? So it's, so who he's been rubbing shoulders with. But then you dig a little deeper and you find out that the person who created the Donald Trump persona that we know today is none other than Roy Cohn. And Roy Cohn was a very important organized crime figure, and meaning, not just the underworld, but also the overworld. Like Peter Dale Scott talked about the deep state being the overworld, which is as far above the law as the underworld is hiding below it, right? These are people who are so powerful that they can commit crimes with impunity. And those people have kind of grabbed a disproportionate share of power away from the legal institutions. So anyway, Roy Cohn was the guy who would, relay the orders from Meyer Lansky, the boss of bosses in the Western Hemisphere, the Jewish organized crime, the banker to organized crime. His orders would go then to Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI, which was he's operating basically as an organized crime capo. And then he passes the orders to Roy Cohn for the New York region and the Eastern Seaboard. And so if Meyer Lansky wants to get rid of a congressman, he tells Hoover, and Hoover tells Cohn, and Cohn sees to it that congressman gets removed by fair means or foul. And this sort of thing, this is kind of how the system works. And so Trump became the very, very close friend and protege of Roy Cohn. Now, Roy Cohn is a notorious pedophile homosexual who liked young men and young boys, and who hosted Jeffrey Epstein-style parties, filming the goings-on and using that for blackmail, just like Epstein did. And of course, Jewish organized crime, Israel, Mossad blackmail. And so Trump was just hanging out. He was the tightest guy of anybody with Cohn. And, people said that maybe Trump was Cohn's boy toy, right? Who knows whether there was really a sexual relationship there or not, but it sure looked like it. And, there's pictures of like Cohn, like practically, walking Trump around on a leash, and Trump's all painted up as this like, androgynous, like, sexual androgynous sex slave or something. And Cohn is like walking around parading with him on a might as well be one of those dog leash choke collar things that these gay people use at the parades. So anyway, that's who created Trump, Roy Cohn, the big time mobster. And then what did Trump do all his life? He built hotels and casinos to launder money for the mob. And as late as like the 90s, Trump Tower was the headquarters for the Russian branch of organized crime that was taking over the show as the Russians moved in and took over from the old mob. So anyway, that's where Trump came from. So he was never the reformer that was going to drain the swamp. He's like the swampiest president ever.
Why do you think that so many people refuse to acknowledge that, especially when he has a cabinet of 15 billionaires besides himself? I remember when this charade went on with him and Elon Musk, and I was telling the people that this was just a charade. Right after they were supposed to be at each other's head, Elon Musk got some of the biggest military and tech contracts in U.S. history. So it's all of this that we see with the so-called divide in the power politics. Is all of this a charade, or does some of it has some legs on it? Because it seems like they're using fake outs to keep people dumbed down to their real policy goals.
Well, I think actually some of these fights you see between these billionaires and kosher Nostra kingpins and their pet politicians actually do have legs. There are, but I think we have to distinguish between the fact that these people are constantly feuding and trying to grab power from each other, but then what gets shown in public. And quite often what gets shown in public is going to be sort of curated, and it's going to be projected out there on the wall with a big projector. And that's what we see. And sometimes what we see is kind of what you get. It's more or less what's really happening. And then other times, not so much. In fact, sometimes it could even be just a big distraction. And what they're showing us is actually either the opposite of what's really going on, or maybe it's designed to distract us from something that's happening over in the shadow somewhere. So that being said, I do think that, like right now, we're seeing this big spat apparently between the Trump administration and Netanyahu. And yeah, that could be real. I mean, I don't know how real it is. You can't trust these people farther than you can proverbially throw them. So you wouldn't put it past them if they could put this forward as a show, imagining that it would lull the Iranians to sleep, and then they could try to bomb the Iranians and kill more of their leaders. This is what they've done twice now. They've pretended to be near breakthroughs in wonderful, happy negotiations with the Iranians, and boom, kill them. So, but the Iranians aren't stupid, right? I mean, whether or not they really invented chess or they just perfected it, either way, they're not stupid. And so the Iranians at this point are not going to fall for any nonsense, fake shows of Trump versus Netanyahu. So if they're putting it on as a show for the Iranians so they can wallop them again in a sneak attack, I don't think that would work. And so I think that probably the American team really is fed up with the Israelis. I mean, why wouldn't they be? Because like all these people are trying to maximize their own power, and they are recognizing, how powerful each of these other players is, but then they, are going to be playing them off against each other. And if somebody's vulnerable, knock them down a couple of notches and grab some of their juice and this sort of thing. And it is just totally ridiculous that the people in charge of the American empire have allowed this pissant little state, fake state, squatting on stolen land in Palestine with, maybe 6.5 million Jewish Ubermensch, self-styled chosen people, lording it over 3 million Arab serfs. That's fewer than 10 million people. So this little fake country of 10 million people that's being run in this apartheid way, this, they're genocidal to the core, that this, horrific little settler colony that's obviously not going to long for this world, is able to maintain itself and extend its unnatural existence by totally taking over the United States. This 350 million people, the world's biggest economy, if you're not doing purchasing power parity adjustments, right? Huge economy, huge military, the world's most powerful player. And yet this little tiny, really obnoxious little settler colony is totally taken over and pushing us around. And so if you were a manager of the United States empire at whatever level, if you're in the CIA or the National Security Council, whatever, if you're not a Jew or a fanatical Protestant lunatic like Pete Hegseth, and you don't have some ethnic or ideological solidarity with this genocidal settler colony calling itself Israel, you would have to hate them. You would have to really say, what the hell is going on here? Who are these people? Why are they pushing us around like this? And why are we letting them do this? And why are we letting them create so much suffering, so much, destabilizing this core part of the world that we have an interest in? And they're screwing it up for us, and they're just slaughtering people and genociding people. So there's just no reason why anybody running the U.S. empire who's not brainwashed and crazy would not be very, very angry at Israel and at Netanyahu. So the stuff that Trump is saying, I think is probably honest. And I think it reflects not only what Trump thinks, but what pretty much everybody else thinks in the national security establishment, except for the traitors, right? The agents of the genocidal entity. And there are some of those, but I think they're in a minority, and they may not be lording it over the majority for very much longer, inshallah.
Well, do you think that these spats that are breaking out openly are because that the American empire's power has been exposed? The world sees that the empire and the emperor no longer has any hegemonic clothes on, and that they are seeing the weaknesses of the empire. They're seeing that the empire can't extend itself into multiple domains as it projected itself and told the world it could, and the massive taking on of debt, and the ills and the divide that is being exacerbated at home. The entire world is watching. And do you think those who are in power are mad because what they thought would be a quick victory has exposed the empire for the entire world to see, and other nations are now jumping off the bandwagon looking for a better trade with China, with Russia, with other nations?
Yeah, I think the managers of the U.S. empire are probably tearing their hair out, saying, what got into us to let Netanyahu waltz in there and convince Trump to attack Iran and totally reveal that the emperor has no clothes. The emperor is naked, and it was Iran was the little kid in the crowd that proved it. Hey, look, the emperor is naked. We can fight him and win. And the empire would have been a lot better off if it had never gone to that point and demonstrated that it had no clothes on. As long as the emperor keeps saying, I've got these clothes on, nobody messes with me. Look what happens to countries that mess with me. Look what happened to, Iraq. We pulverized it. Look what happened to Afghanistan. Well, we lost, but, we caused a lot of havoc, and we won World War II, and Vietnam, whatever, though. We ended up, tight with them against China anyway, so it didn't matter. And so the empire could kind of say, you're better off just going along with what we tell you to do. But now, not so much. So now the region, the Middle East or West Asia region, is in a whole different game now. They're this Iran's terms, which Trump has signed onto in this, what do they call a memorandum of understanding? So I guess it's not a treaty, it's not an agreement, it's a memorandum of understanding. But if you actually read it, wow, the first thing, the U.S. has to get Israel out of Lebanon, and actually peace on all fronts. That would include Palestine too. So actually, Iran, their maximum interpretation would be if the U.S. doesn't make Israel withdraw from Gaza and from Lebanon, then no deal. That's the first thing. And then the rest of the U.S. has to pull out of the region, right? Iran already pulverized the American bases, and now let's make it formal, right? Where the U.S. isn't going to occupy that region anymore. Now that's a massive defeat right there. And what do the Americans get? Well, they get the Strait of Hormuz open under Iranian control authority, and they won't take what do they call it? They won't be taking they'll be taking fees, but they won't be taking whatever else it was, tolls. They won't take any tolls. They'll only take fees. So. So I mean, you read this agreement, and I was actually surprised. I mean, I knew Iran won. I knew it would be super favorable to Iran, but I didn't realize it would be quite, that much of a victory, a sweeping victory in every possible way. I mean, what's left out here? I mean, what the only other thing Iran could have possibly gotten on top of all of this was like if the United States said, "Oh yeah, okay, and by the way, we'll let you have the nuclear bomb too, and in fact, we'll give you a few hundred." So they left that. They didn't go quite that far, but pretty much everything else went Iran's way. So anyway, yeah, the managers of the U.S. empire are just saying, what are we doing here? Like letting Trump, let Netanyahu drag us into this and screw it, totally blow our whole operation in West Asia. So yeah, they're unhappy.
So recently, a lot of U.S. Treasury sales have failed. We see that there was a major cut in the tax revenue. We see that America's war expenditures have exploded, and we see that America has become a service economy, not an industrial or technological power as it once was, but a service economy. With that said, in nations exiting the dollar, and we look at America, let's look at her patterns. Do you think what I describe as the 3 R's of empire, rest, rearming, and recalibrating, it is where America is at right now as she licks her wounds from her strategic defeat in West Asia?
Well, yeah, I guess the resting, sure, absolutely. They're not, having to pump all of the resources into the region to keep all this military machine going, which has a lot of military machine has actually been destroyed or chased out already. So they're resting and licking their wounds, absolutely. And recalibration, yeah, they're rethinking. They say, well, what do we do now? We just dug ourselves into this deep hole. We just, we gave Iran a perfect excuse to take control of the Strait of Hormuz, the equivalent of nuclear weapons, and now they're not going to give it back. And that means they get the biggest say in the region from now on. And that totally changes the equation. And the reason that it worked out that way is because U.S. allies are hurting the most from the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Europe is just getting killed. And then Japan is getting killed. Korea is getting killed. So if the U.S. wants to have any empire at all, it's going to have to get that strait open at any cost. And that's why Trump finally admitted, well, yeah, actually, we actually do need the oil going through the strait. That was one of these amazing, true, sane things that he said the other day. I put out a satire claiming that the Iranian psychiatrists who've been treating Trump, which is actually true, the Iranian psychiatrists have been advising the Iranian negotiators on how to deal with a megalomaniacal psychopathic narcissist. And the Iranian negotiating team says they've been doing much, much, much better ever since they got that advice from the top psychiatrists in Iran. So I wrote a satire about that, taking off from there and saying that the psychiatrists from Iran have claimed great progress in helping Trump recuperate from his obsessive psychotic delusions. And then I listed a bunch of these true things that Trump has said, like in the last 48 hours, like Hamas is actually behaving very well. And, Israel should stop blowing up apartments full of innocent people. And of course, Netanyahu he curses out Netanyahu and says, everybody hates Israel. And I don't know, Trump has said this, maybe a dozen or a couple of dozen blurt outs that were more truthful than anything any president has said about these topics for a long time. So I did my satire saying, yeah, the Iranian psychiatrists are taking credit for curing him from psychosis. And now he's back in the reality-based community.
He also said that had it not been for the United States, that Iran would have totally destroyed Israel also. That's what he also said that.
Yeah. And he said, and then Vance is backing him up, saying that the Israelis should be very, very careful because Trump is the only head of state in the world that can stand them anymore. They've got one head of state in the world who runs the world's most powerful country, who still who doesn't hate their guts, who still is sort of on their side. Maybe if you guys are really, really, if you behave yourselves. So yeah, it seems like they're if it's all an act, I don't see why it has no point, because they're not going to fool the Iranians into letting their guard down. So no, I think it's actually just reality setting in, and so they're thinking. You talked about recalibrating. Well, the big challenge to the U.S. empire is the rise of China. That's that's about 90% of what they have to worry about. And so getting bogged down in this other stuff, like Iran, fighting Iran for Israel, is pointless. It's and totally destructive to the larger mission of trying to maintain the empire. But the empire has pretty much reached its limit anyway. But this is really, I think, pushing it over the cliff. And the guys running the empire, I think, are kind of scrambling, trying to figure out, how to deal with this. They're not used to this. Nobody's ever lived in a world where the U.S. was not really, basically the most powerful country in the world, with a set of alliances that it could use. They were like levers on the machine of power, and suddenly that machine is seized up, and suddenly, whoa, China's got half again as big a purchasing power adjusted economy as the U.S., and we can't do anything in West Asia anymore. Iran just proved it, and so good luck going up against China, which is 10 times more powerful than Iran. And Russia is getting real sick of these pissant Europeans hitting them with these little drones all the time. And if Russia decides to make some kind of demonstration to the Europeans that you guys are going to have to back off and stop helping Ukraine do this, stop manufacturing all these drones that are blowing up in Moscow, the U.S. isn't going to do anything about it. And so it's a whole new world. The U.S. is really not running the world anymore.
And I think the debt situation, the political crisis, the wealth divide at home, the rich getting richer, the destruction of America's educational system, the dumbing down of the masses of the people, the elite continuing to spit in the face of the masses. I think that all plays a part, but we also know that prophecy plays a part in all of this too, bringing down the fall of the American empire. But you brought up a good point about China. America she shot her shot, and she has expended a lot of energy, a lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of political and geopolitical capital trying to bring West Asia to yield so that they could use it as a battering ram against Russia and China. And I want to play this clip for you to show you what China has been doing while America has been doing what she's doing.
In business tonight, China has announced fresh measures to push the global use of the yuan and better manage domestic money market liquidity. The country's top finance leaders in Shanghai for an annual forum. Our senior correspondent Tan Yuguan reports.
Lu Jiazui is one of China's top financial policy forums, starring speakers from China's central bank, financial regulators, as well as Shanghai's top officials. But this year, Vice Premier He Lifeng makes a rare appearance, the first central government vice premier to speak in person at the event in 7 years. His presence immediately lifts the tone of the event from sector-level policy discussions to broader national economic signaling. And the message is consistent. China wants to push financial opening and support companies going global, but within a tightly managed framework. The Vice Premier says the government will help improve cross-border trade and investment in Shanghai, a significant move in a country where cross-border money flows are restricted.
在上海开展更加灵活的贸易外汇结算试点，以及跨境再保险收入境外投资便利化试点，将跨国公司跨境资金集中运营管理试点推广至上海，便利跨国公司跨境资金统筹使用。
The vice premier also vows to tackle local government debt and said another 300 billion yuan in special bonds will be issued to replenish the capital of financial institutions. China's central bank governor also took to the podium, announcing a series of measures, including a tool to enable overseas central banks, sovereign wealth funds, and international financial organizations to obtain yuan liquidity more easily.
我们还将丰富离岸人民币债转、衍生品供给，支持香港建设全球离岸人民币业务枢纽，在境外形成有深度和活跃度的离岸人民币市场。我们将加强开放条件下的金融稳定保障体系和能力建设，守住不发生系统性风险的底线。
Observers see China's gradual steps to internationalize the yuan as a bid to reduce its dependence on a global payment system dominated by the US dollar. On China's slowing loan growth, the central bank leader said it's difficult and unnecessary for China's credit growth to maintain its previous pace. Tan Yu-guan, CNA, Shanghai.
So as we see that, we also see other nations like Kenya and other African nations, even Britain and some European nations, including Russia, issuing Chinese panda bonds and stuff. So we see there's a breakout from the SWIFT system, the dollar system. We see that slowly but surely. And I think this is what is recalibrating America's position. She's losing in West Asia. And West Asia was supposed to be the pawn for her to leapfrog into surrounding and controlling and even breaking China's rise. And I want to read something to you and get your opinion on this right after. This came out. This was published June 1st, 2026, by Jackson Okada. And the title of it was on RT, "The End of SWIFT," with a question mark. It says, China's digital leap in Africa. China's digital payment system being introduced on the continent helps reduce dollar dependency, experts believe. As China doubles down on its economic presence in Africa, the relationship is entering a new phase that goes beyond bricks and mortar. The Beijing Action Plan 2025 through 2027 includes support for 30 infrastructure connectivity projects across Africa, while countries such as Kenya and Uganda are already reviving Chinese-backed transport links, such as the standard gauge railway extension and the Rairon Mao Summit Highway toward the Uganda border. For analysts watching the continent's financial future, these developments matter not only because they move goods, but also because they may create a commercial architecture for a parallel payment system built around China's digital RMB, potentially giving African economies a faster, less dollar-dependent way of trade. Do you think all of that is playing into the recalibration of the American psychopaths in power?
Yeah, they're facing a crisis right now because that problem of maintaining the exorbitant privileges of the U.S. dollar, which it was running on gold from World War II until the early 1970s, and then Nixon and Kissinger faced the end of the America's monopolization of the world's gold supply. They couldn't continue. The French wanted to cash in their gold, so the Americans had to find a different way to keep the dollar the world's reserve currency. So after the 1973 war, Kissinger convinced the Saudis to insist on selling oil only in gold, or rather only in dollars, rather. And that meant that energy in general would be sold in dollars. And that meant that every country which buys energy, which is most of them, had to stockpile lots of dollars to buy energy. And that led to demand for dollars, which has kept the US dollar high enough that the US can afford to run this big balance of payments deficit. They can, international trade deficits, doesn't matter. They can just print dollars and force the world to take them. And so the US, that's why people like Michael Hudson have pointed out, the US can afford to pay for all these military bases all over the planet. And it can afford to pay for a military that's 10 times as big as it should be. And, bigger than the top 10 other countries' militaries put together. And that's what's kept this empire going. And that was all built on the petrodollar. And that was built on this U.S. Special relationship with the Saudis and the oil-producing countries. But that's over now, because Iran has actually just not only freed itself, but has freed the region from this dollar empire. And at this point, I think the U.S. empire managers are saying, look, we are going to face if we don't watch out, the dollar is going to lose maybe a third of its power vis-a-vis other currencies, which is going to be a disaster for American standard of living. And we got to try to prevent that, or at least cushion it. How are we going to do that? And I think actually it's possible that this bizarre sort of pro-Iran flip that we've seen this past week could be, they're almost floating the possibility of genuinely restoring good relations with Iran, right? One of those, what were they calling it? Like they've talked periodically about a total reset with Iran. And now that's what the U.S. would need. If the U.S. gets frozen out of West Asia and you get a block there that basically all the West Asian oil producing countries are suddenly not listening to the United States, they're hostile to the United States, that would just be a disaster. So the Americans are going to try to keep a finger in the pie there by perhaps really going for this reset of relations with Iran. It's hard to imagine right now, after they've murdered those 160 schoolgirls at Minab school and murdered the supreme leader Elijah Hamu and totally alienated Iran and the region and the world. But that's almost what they need to do. They really, they need to acknowledge that defeat in a way that doesn't force them to basically leave as a completely defeated enemy. And maybe this whole talk of this, $300 billion rebuilding fund for Iran, which all the Zionists are screaming about, that is what that's really about. That the Americans are going to try to stay tight with the Gulf countries, try to keep them, trading using the dollar and so on, stay in the dollar block, and then throw a whole pile of money at Iran that ultimately amounts to sort of a bribe to Iran to, don't pry the whole region completely loose from the U.S. empire. But, will that work out? I don't know. It's just such a radical change. And then it would cut so harshly against the Zionist interests when, let's face it, Jews are they have about half of the financial clout and more than half of the media clout in the Western Empire. Will they put up with it? I don't know. So it's an interesting moment, though.
And I think that America has put itself in such a situation because we are now watching simultaneously the decline of the American dollar and the fall of America. And this is something that we never thought that we would be able to witness at the same time. And look what's happening as it's happening, the destruction of America's educational system, because we know that it is education, proper education, which civilizes us and builds progressive, sustainable civilizations. So all of that is happening as America continues to take on debt. And remember that her military was her instrument to continue the dollar hegemonic system. And now the weight of the debt of the military is wearing down the weight of the entire economic structure of the American empire. So she's caught in a catch-22, no matter what she does. And as you were talking, I just Googled something. I put this in the search engine: Iran, Russia, China payment system. And it came out, it says, Iran, Russia, and China bypass Western financial networks by using a combination of alternative messaging systems, direct local currency settlements, and shadow banking channels. It also tells us that Iran has put its system in connection with Russia's system, and Russia's system is now connected to the Chinese SIPS system, which is comparable to SWIFT and system. So now we see these nations that America has alienated and tried to stop their growth and try and sanction and try to destabilize and making war with, have now cobbled out their own lane economically. And so when I say she's caught in a catch-22, war doesn't yield her what she wants, what war once yielded to her. The booty of war, taking other people's stuff. Now all war is doing is bringing more debt on the empire, causing it a faster collapse. And I want to play this short little clip from a CIA agent about, and I think it's about 45 seconds, 50 seconds, about why America is at war.
Why are there so many wars in 2025? Well, do you want my real answer or do you want my diplomatic answer? My real answer is the US has a defense budget that is bigger than the next 8 largest countries combined. After 9/11, the US entered into something like a permanent wartime economy, where if we didn't have a war to fight and to finance, we would actually go into recession. Now, we see ourselves as the world's peacekeepers. In many cases, we're not. We tend to be places where we're not wanted or welcome, and we end up forgetting to leave. There's an old joke inside the CIA about Iran. Like, why would Iran put its country right in the middle of all of our military bases? There you have it.
Before you comment, there are 2 short other clips that I want to go hand in hand with this. Here is the second of 3.
You obviously spent 22 years in the CIA. What lessons has America failed to learn?
Basically, all of them. It's a very unusual thing for people to be so full of arrogance and hubris when we've lost every war we've fought since 1945. And we're certainly not winning in Iran at the moment. For some reason, they thought that if we went there, they would come out and cheer and throw flowers at us and things. The same deal we heard about how the Iraqis were going to respond. It's almost like it's an illness that you either don't care or you don't want to take the time to understand how Iranians, how Afghans, how Iraqis think. Trump talked a good game, and when he became president again, he became a warlord. But that remains. Our ignorance of the world is staggering.
Here is the third one. This is a short one also.
The United States is an empire in decline. And if you look back over the past 100 years, the lessons of history are pretty clear. Declining empires suffer from 2 things. One, they suffer from what's called micro-militarism abroad. They send troops abroad. They, in their flailing decline, thinking that some form of military intervention will recapture the global power that is slipping away from their hands. And then domestically, the other thing they suffer from, every single declining empire over the past 100 years, the Soviet Empire, British Empire, the Spanish, all the rest, they suffer from coups. So as American politics become increasingly contorted and irrational, I think the thing to do is to realize that we are an empire in decline and we are writhing in this kind of irrationality, particularly in the international realm, and it will continue for another decade or 2 until the power, American power, finally slips away.
The rot is systemic. I actually think that people are only looking at it for right now. And I believe that America, I liken the American empire to a snake. And you know, once you cut off the snake's head, you have to bury the venomous head because it still can poke you and it still can inject venom. But the body of the snake continues to contort upwards of hours after the snake has been beheaded. And I believe that the system was beheaded in 1914. I believe that when America defaulted on her debt in 1930, when she revalued her money, and then in the 1960s, when she stole the silver content out of her money, and up into the from 1965 to 70, when she stole the last bit of silver content out of her coins, then she was forced for a year to try to come up with something. Then we went into 1971 when America says, the US dollar is as good as gold. And Charles de Gaulle said, well, then give us gold then. and there was a run on the dollar, and Nixon was forced to take the world off the gold and silver standard. And then America came up with this scheme of the petrodollar. I think all of these things are the contortion of the snake, from the repealing of the Glass-Steagall Act up into the pumping of the money into the 2008 financial crisis, up into the bailouts and all of this. I don't think that the collapse of the American empire is 15 or 20 years into the future. I believe rigor mortis is starting to set into the imperial apparatus as we see today. And this is what is causing the irrational policy, the irrational thoughts, and the irrational movements of the empire. What do you say in closing, Professor?
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, Rashid, and I think you're onto something. The centrality of banking to all of this is, really can't be overstressed. And you're right that, in 1913, 1914, the Federal Reserve took over. And so we had this particular cabal of banksters, private banksters, that dominated the currency creation ever since. And that set the stage. You could say that that's when America as a genuinely autonomous and sovereign nation was beheaded. Sure, you could say that. Although I still think the culture, American culture and economic power and so on, was running with a lot of steam after that, and came out, with most of the world's gold after World War II, after basically winning World War II. The Russians did all the fighting, but the U.S. came out on top. And so but yeah, I think you're largely right. And I do think that the big fight right now is between this corrupt, let's call it what it is, Jewish dominated banking system of the West. It's based on private banking, usury, fiat money creation by private parties, creating private money out of nothing that is then lent back to the government at interest, forcing every taxpayer and citizen to pay that interest to these banksters. This is an inherently corrupt system. It's a usurious system. It's haram in Islam. It's forbidden by Christianity. But the Jews are allowed to lend to non-Jews, so it's okay under Judaism. So anyway, yeah, that's really the core. And so the Western Empire, run by these Jewish bankers, or these usury bankers, private bankers, has expanded and nearly taken over the world, but not quite. Now we have a different model. We have China in particular with a public bank that is growing much faster. It works much better. They've got more power in the same way that Germany in the 1930s under Hitler did very well economically and was suddenly able to challenge the whole world in just a few years after it had been completely bankrupt, because public bank, you chase those private usury banksters out, you institute some form of public banking, and your country runs way better. So that's the big fight, is between these corrupt usury banksters that run the West and public banking in China. And then, inshallah, we'll see some real Islamic banking as well, which will be public banking with a special focus on preventing usury or riba. And I think the Islamic world needs to sit down and think hard about how to make that happen.
So in closing, would you agree with me when I say that we're living in a strange time? We're living in a change of worlds, a change of paradigms. And as this world changes from the old world order into something altogether new, we're watching the decline of America's dollar, the fall of America, and the destruction of America's educational system.
Yeah, we're probably seeing some of all of that. And to what extent it's just America, I don't know. I think Europe is falling just as fast as America is, actually. And they're not looking out for their own interests at all. They're poking the Russian bear, and may get nuked for their troubles. The European, and they're totally in denial. I mean, the Europeans, if anything, they might even be worse off, or declining faster. But of course, they're just the sort of the tail end of the American empire anyway. But yeah, I think the whole culture, the American culture, is kind of running on fumes. It was the hope. The world looked up to America. We had all these icons, Marilyn Monroe and John F. Kennedy, and the movie stars and Hollywood and music and all of this stuff. And the whole world loves everything American, and still to some extent does. But at this point, it's become hollowed out. And so you go to like Vietnam and you see Marilyn Monroe on the walls in the cafe or whatever, all these American icons and American music. And of course, hip hop is everywhere. But it's kind of, it doesn't, we're at the tail decadent end of it. And people are not really inspired by it anymore. They're kind of just narcoticized by it almost. They're zombified by what's left of American culture. And so whatever happens next that's positive and uplifting and genuinely energizing and inspiring worldwide, I don't think it's going to come from the U.S. And if it does, it's going to be something real different from what we see now. Because what we see now, as you said, is sort of the end of this decadent phase as it collapses and putrefies.
First of all, I want to send out my condolences to you and all of those who were close to your colleague that you lost. The Red Pill Diaries and our family want to send out our condolences to you. I want to say shukram for joining me on this, and I'll send you the video. Ma salama.
Thank you, Rashid. Ma salama.
Everybody, I want you all to remember, as I often go out, I have to go out the way that I always come in. I come in the name of God, and I go out in the name of God. And I want to say this to you all. Do right by others, not because there's some material gain to be had or because of some accolades that could be poured upon you. Do right by others because it's the right, the humane, and the godly thing to do. Because even when no one else is watching you, remember that God Almighty is watching you. As my late, great, and beautiful mother would always say, God sits high on the throne of power, but he looks low at the actions of man. Know that I love each and every one of you who loves truth, but know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, remember to stay righteous, because righteousness is the only thing that's going to get us out of here. Hey, mama, your baby boy still loves you more than life. Thank you, everybody. Deuces, we're out of here. Peace.
Told you to walk away. That was my first and last mistake.